Hello everybody, if this is the first time you've been on my channel or seen one of my videos, let me tell you a little bit about myself. My name's Shaf Rasul, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I'm a former dragon on BBC Dragon's Den Online and I'm a columnist for a national newspaper. In this series I try and answer my viewers' questions about property, about finance, about business, about personal finance and entrepreneurship. Now guys, we're going to jump straight into the questions, but before we jump into the questions, can I ask you to do me a big favour? I'm not getting as many questions as I used to, and also I'm getting a lot of repeats of questions, but if you do have any questions, can you please put them in the comments below, because if I don't have questions, I can't basically do a video. And in this week's episode of Ask Shaf Live, I'm going to be joined by one of our trusted advisors, Mark Gillies from Graham and Sibbald, who's going to help me tackle some of the questions. Thank you. Now, before we start, there's some questions that I haven't answered. The reasons for not answering them, it could be that I have a guest coming on in the next 2 weeks that has an expert or specialist knowledge in the particular question you asked me. So next week, I have Murray Stewart from Gilson Gray coming on. He's a specialist property lawyer, so it may well be I've decided to save the question for him. Or the other reason I haven't answered them is I'm doing an Ask Shaf Live special where I'll answer that particular question in a great deal more detail. Mark, thank you for coming on the channel. Do you just want to introduce yourself to my viewers, tell them who you are, who you work for, and how we know each other?
Sure. So I'm Mark Gillies. I work for Graham and Sibbald Chartered Surveyors in Glasgow. The firm cover the whole of Scotland though. I'm an associate partner in there. And I've known Shaf for about 4 years now. But as a firm, we've actually known him for coming on, I think, 2 decades or so, with a long-standing relationship. And then in the last kind of probably say 10 years, the Edinburgh office, specifically Keith Waters, has had a very, very strong relationship.
Graham and Sibbald originally did ad hoc work for us, and then about 6 or 7 years ago, Graham and Sibbald basically became our retained advisors. Do you want to just explain to my viewers how that works?
Essentially, being a retained advisor means that you kind of get the best quality information. So being a surveyor and an agent specifically, your entire job is finding deals and finding opportunities. And when you have a retained relationship, it's very much a kind of a two-way street. If Shaf ever needs anything, then you just pick up the phone to me and we can discuss any opportunities that have been put to you, or alternatively, if we find opportunities, then we'll put those to you direct as soon as they become available as well. So it's very much a two-way street, and it's been working pretty well for a long time now.
Can we just do some specific examples of the first part of the relationship where I ask you for advice? Okay, let's do 2 real life examples. I recently bought a property in Hawick. When I say recently, it was probably about a year ago. Do you remember the conversation? Because you exclusively advised me on that.
Yes, I do remember that one. Yeah.
Do you want to just talk my viewers through
Yeah, so essentially, Shaf had a number of assets actually down in Hawick, and there was another potential tenant that was looking at one of his other assets, and another agent.
Listen, you're free to name the assets. It's not a problem at all. So I've got no issues.
So Hawick Trade Park, Shaf bought, and actually GNS had advised on the acquisition of that, which had a pretty good tenant mix. However, there was opportunity to improve that and add value and add income, and also extend out the WALT on that, which is the weighted average unexpired lease term. And so in working with Shaf, we were able to improve that. However, there were a couple units that needed to be occupied. Another agent at DM Hall, who has a close relationship with Shaf, Anthony Stanovich, he had a client, a tenant that was interested, and they had a property in Hawick itself, and there was an opportunity to acquire that property and do a larger deal. And so Shaf picked up the phone and asked me my opinion on that. In doing so, I was then able to do a little bit of research behind it and advise that the price that was being quoted was a little bit high. However, we could end up doing a deal at a lower level, and then Shaf went back and was able to negotiate that direct.
So essentially what happened was we had an industrial estate, we had a vacant unit, And for that vacant unit to be filled, there was a tenant, but the tenant said, before I can move into your units, I need to sell my own unit. So I phoned Mark and said, Mark, should I buy this company's unit? Mark's advice was, the asking price is too much, Shaf. If you can bring the price down, you should be able to buy it, asset manage it, and then sell it for a profit. That is literally exactly what we did. That was my mobile phone there just ringing. So there's that one. And then there's another instance of a property in air. Do you remember advising me on that?
Yeah. So again, this one was probably my favorite deal from last year, actually. So essentially, there was a unit on Prestwick Road, which was an investment which had a Tesco and a bath store. So two tenants in effectively what was an industrial shed that had been converted to this trade unit for bath store and the Tesco's. The investment was on the market at £1.5 million, if I'm not mistaken. It had been put to Shaf by, again, another agent, actually. But the advice there was, if we could acquire it at a level that was certainly a lot less than 1.5, then because Bathstore were a business that were certainly on the brink of what ended up happening, which was that they went under, although it certainly wasn't kind of confirmed at that stage. So what Shaf was advised to do by GNS and by myself was to effectively build in enough of a discount there to counteract that risk, and in doing so, you're able to secure it for £1 million.
That's right. So we bought it for £1 million. So we bought it for 500,000 less than the asking price, on the understanding that we provided the proof of funds to be able to purchase it, and we could perform within a very quick timescale.
And to be fair, I mean, I think if you weren't in funds, like you say, and able to move, I don't think that offer would have been accepted. And that's really a learning point for a lot of people that are watching your channel, in the basis that if you have cash and you're able to move quickly, then you're able to get deals. There is a bit more risk involved in that. Because you're buying with cash straight away, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't then go and get lending on it down the line. But what it does do for the vendor is it allows them to sell and then move on. And that's what you did in this case.
Now, I need to tell you about my due diligence process, because what I did was I picked up the phone to the chairman of the bath store, and I said, look, there's a lot of information in the press that you may go into administration. What's the chances of that happening? And he says, no chance. We've got strong support from our lenders, etc. And I says, okay, do you trade well out of these premises? He said, no. So I said, how about I do a deal with you? You pay me some money and I'll cancel your lease. So he wanted to do that. So I was absolutely delighted. I'm buying this building for £1 million. I've done my due diligence. The bath store want to pay me some money to get out of the lease. So I bought it. And I think 2 days after I bought it, what happened, Mark? Can you remember?
They went into administration and they closed the doors.
They closed the doors.
But again, what was really good with this deal was that we had backup options, and so we were discussing previous to you buying it what the alternatives for the unit were, and it was a 6,000 square foot unit along with 3,000 or so square feet of Tesco. Now the real covenant there obviously is the Tesco, and the real value that you're buying is the Tesco, but the bath store was the largest demise within the kind of whole area. So what we did with this was that we had numerous backups. So you had a conversation with bath store previous to acquiring it.
Plan A was bath store,
yeah,
okay,
exactly.
Paying us some money to get out. And then once bath store were out, we had a plan B, which was somebody Mark had found to rent the premises from us anyway.
What ended up actually transpiring was that when bath store went into administration, because you've got a retained agent, we've got the same relationships across the entire network of agencies and different practices across the country, and there was a requirement that came across my desk from Stephen McParlin of McParlin & Co. for a business that required specific accommodation down in Ayrshire. And I put the actual details. This was having had a conversation with yourself, Shaf, obviously. I put the particulars over to Stephen just as Bastor were going under, and said, actually, this meets the requirements of your clients. What do you think? And he said, yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And off the back of that, you actually then met with the purchaser direct, and we're able to negotiate, an extremely kind of positive transaction for not just yourself, but also the acquiring party as well, which was a win-win for everybody.
That's right. I think we'll do a case study on that, but I think that explains quite well how our relationship works in terms of you giving me advice. So what about in terms of GNS bringing deals to me? I think the best one we can talk about is Keith finding me a buyer for my warehouse at Newbridge, which was worth £2.2 million in my books. It's 4.3 million he sold that for. That was Keith Waters, sold that for 4.3 million. An eye-watering amount of money. That'll be another case study. We had a special purchaser in that instance, but that'll be another case study in the future. So, Mark, I think we've got quite a few questions I want to zoom through, but there's one I've been wanting you to answer because I've got my own take on this, but it'd be good to get your take. It's from Mr. Dojob. What are the most common mistakes people make usually with commercial property?
Yeah, I mean, Shaf will have his own opinions about this, but I think
I've answered this last week, so it's good to get your opinions. And remember, a lot of my viewers are complete novices, and mistakes that I wouldn't make, they may make because they just don't have the experience.
I mean, I think the biggest thing about commercial property is that it isn't obviously like residential. It's an extremely positive investment simply because it is, in my view, it carries a lot less risk than residential. It's a lot less hands-on. What Shaf always touches on is due diligence aspect of it, and that is the most important thing. You really need to know exactly what you're acquiring and the pitfalls of that. Now, if we use the Prestwick Road and Ayr property as an example, if you were to buy that and Shaf hadn't been able to move as quickly with the kind of cash reserves that he had, then you potentially would have acquired that with funding, and overnight you would have acquired an asset that Vastor, as soon as they go under, the bank are going to be picking up the phone and saying, right, okay, how are we going to deal with this? What actions are you going to take? Because right away you don't have that income kind of guaranteed anymore, and so that potentially kind of can break some covenants and other things, and you start to kind of look at the kind of alternatives. And if you've not done your due diligence on the alternatives for that property or for any property that you're investing in, then that's where the kind of pitfalls come along. And so I think the best thing you can do is, and it's easy for me to say this, but I think Shaf has always touched on this, is that if you have a good relationship with agents, whether or not they're retained or not, they will be able to give you advice about kind of the prospects for that property in the long term, as well as the short to medium term. And knowing the kind of opportunities and the prospects for any property that you're seriously investing in is absolutely vital, because that value can erode overnight if you've not done your due diligence effectively.
So you think one of the biggest common mistakes is not having an agent? A lot of people are nervous about contacting agents. They might have a small residential portfolio and they're saying, I don't want to contact an agent because I'll just come across as a newbie. What advice would you give to them?
Everybody's different, and but certainly in my experience, I will always engage with everybody, simply because no matter if they're a newbie right now, in commercial property, they might have a massive residential portfolio that GNS as a firm that have a residential offering as well can assist with. And as I say, every agent is different, but I will always give people the time of day and give them advice, because I'd like them to think that they need assistance in the future, whether or not it's a month from now, or a year from now, or 10 years from now, that they'll remember that I gave them that assistance from the off. So it's really just, once you have that relationship, then it'll go a long way. But probably just pick up the phone and speak to myself or my colleagues or anybody in the market, and you'll figure out the kind of good from the bad pretty quickly. I'm sure of that.
So any other tips about common mistakes in commercial property, or should we move on from that question?
I think it all comes back to due diligence. That's probably the main point, and knowing what you're buying in terms of the actual kind of building itself. The bricks and mortar, you need to have done your due diligence on that, as well as the kind of market prospects of it.
Let's start off with Damien Jorgensen. Damien's going to be moving to the UK and wants to get into property investing ASAP. Would it be a mistake to buy a property with a newly created limited company and rent it out to my wife and I? The idea, of course, would be to move to a home better suited for us later on, and the first property would be rented out. So my view on this is, if you're going to move into this house, what you want to do is get a mortgage for it, because when you do sell it, it's going to be tax-free. That's assuming you sell it. So my advice would be, literally just get it as a mortgage. It's your first home. And if you're going to sell it, basically, you would get it tax-free. Now, what he's saying is the first property would be rented out. So I don't think he wants to sell it. Now, I'm doing an in-depth video about this because I have so many questions, and I can speak in general terms, and it doesn't really apply to other circumstances. I think it's quite important people understand this principle because it's one of the best ways of making some quick money in property using your own home. I will answer this question in detail then. Daniel I, if I rent my property after living in it for 3 years, do I pay capital gains tax if I decide to sell since I don't live there anymore? I'm afraid you do there. I'm just going to throw up the guidance on the screen for you. But as I've just said to the previous question, I am going to do a detailed video about this. Daniel Simon again. Hi, Shaf. Can you do a video on how to read a company's financial statements? Of course I can. Now, guys, I've promised to do a number of videos, but the problem here is I don't do YouTube full time. I do have a proper job, so I'm having to sort of stagger up the videos. Now, the first video that I'm doing, I'm calling it an Ask Shaf Live special. The first one I'm doing, there's a thing coming up on the screen telling you the date that it's going to be live on. And then after that one, I'll do another one and another one. I've got about 6 videos I've promised the viewers of Ask Shaf Live I'll do. And no matter what, I will definitely do these, but you just have to give me a bit of time, so deal with that, no problems for you. Excellent. Right, let's move on to David Gorn. I have noticed a lot of static caravans for sale, anywhere between 15,000 to 30,000, and I know people who live there paying rents of 500 to 800 per month. So my question is, with these being so cheap in comparison to buying a house and still renting out for a lot of money per month, if you had somewhere to put it, would you consider this as a good investment? I actually have a friend that does this for a living, so I know a little bit about this. Some of the things you have to look at, where are you going to site the caravan? Because you've got site fees. Okay, site fees can be anything up to £3,000 a year. So you've got site fees. You've also got to look at the site policy, because some sites only allow caravans to be put on the site if you've purchased the caravan from there. Other sites will not let caravans over 10 years old onto their sites. So effectively, caravan's 10 years old, get it, you know, they're like, nah, you can't be on our site anymore. So that's a big, big challenge. Hence the reason why a lot of caravans come up, because they're, you know, they're like 10 years, 11 years old. You've got to remember, unlike a house, a caravan is a depreciating asset. So it might be worth £30,000 in year 1. By the time you get to year 10, it might be worth £1,000. The other thing is, you can't go in and get a mortgage for a caravan. You might be able to get another loan, but it won't be at the same rates as a mortgage. And a lot of caravan parks have quite strict agreements where you can't actually sublet. That's another challenge. And finally, when you do get to the end of it, you've got to factor in the cost of removal. So providing, David, you've taken into account all of the points I've just mentioned to you, it may well be a good opportunity, but you've just got to weigh that up against everything that I've just told you. Have you got anything to add to that, Mark?
No, I mean, it's not a market that I'm regularly in, but the only thing I would kind of add to it is that if you've caravans for sale, then if you're looking at it like David is saying, purely from an income stream and holding those assets, then it's not going to be a big issue. However, you've got to remember that if, you know, why is there a lot of caravans there ready for sale at this point in time, and how competitive is it going to be if you do need to access that capital quickly by selling it in the future?
I suppose the upside we've got to remember is, with a lot of foreign travel restrictions that are obviously going to stay in place for a period of time, people may stay in the UK, they'll have a staycation, and the demand for these things may go up, but you've got to look at the downside risks, do some proper due diligence. I've pointed a few of them out for you. GH, can you explain in more detail holding company model, please? GH, I've said in a previous video, I will do this. I'll absolutely get on to doing this, no issues at all. So I'm actually going to do a video about limited companies, and it'll look at holding companies, so that's not a problem. So what else is he talking about? Right, so I talked previously in my video about when I first started buying property, Mark, I bought it in my personal name.
Yep.
Okay, and I had to transfer it to my limited company. Now, it was such a long time ago, it was 20 years ago, circa. How did you transfer the personal property to the holding company? Basically, we had to sell it from myself to the limited company. Okay, there were costs involved, there were taxes for doing this, yes. But again, I will look at this in detail when it comes to my limited company video, holding company video.
I would just add to that, obviously you'll touch on it, but you just need to make sure that you've got the right accountant to advise on exactly how best to transfer the assets, making sure that the right taxes and everything else are being paid. So just get the right accountant.
GH goes on to basically talk about the OpCo, the PropCo OpCo strategy. Again, I'm going to cover this in my Ask Shaf Live special video, which I'll do in a couple of weeks' time. The first one that's coming out is probably going to be 40 minutes. So I'll cover that then, because there's so many variables on this, because I think I just need to lay it out in a structured manner in a detailed video. So that's what I'm going to do with this one. Okay, Gos Comparis. He's saying I should ask people to like my video at the start of the video, okay, because a lot of people might not watch it to the very end. Guys, follow Gos's advice. Please hit the like button. It's just below you right now. Just do that right now, okay? Thanks, Mark. So let's jump on to the next question. I'm briefly going to go through these questions because I think I'm going to cover them all in my holding company / limited company video. First question is, can you tell me a little bit more about your property company and the operations company? How does it work? So basically, how it works is we essentially have a holding company, which is up here. The holding company owns 3 property companies. One of the property companies is SRA Ventures. Another one is SRAV Property. SRA Ventures is a VAT registered company. Any properties that are opted for tax, we put in there. SRAV Property is not a VAT registered company, so any properties that are not opted for tax go in there. And then we have Shastra Property, which is a residential company. So the OpCo that I'm going to create will be a separate company which will rent our crowd kitchens from SRA Ventures. So that's how that works. But again, I'm going to do a very, very detailed video on this. It might sound strange, but would it be possible to buy a property in a limited company using a buy-to-let mortgage and then rent it from this company? Yes, it is possible. For example, a lot of my friends have done this in the past where they've got a property company. They take full advantage of the fact that their own home, they can renovate their own home and sell it for a profit. But what they'll do is they'll sell their own home and they'll wait for another good opportunity to come, and they will move into a property which is owned by their residential property company, and they will just pay rent to that residential property company. Is it okay for a director to be renting a property from the company he controls? Absolutely no problems, as long as you're paying market value. Right, here's a good one. I know you are operating within the commercial property, but do you know how mortgage companies do the valuation of residential properties? That's dead easy. It's comparables, Mark. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so essentially, you're remortgaging or mortgage in Scotland. What you've got is the home report, and the home report needs to be done for every property that is about to go onto the market, and that sets the exact value of that property, and that's effectively to give every inquiring party a rule of thumb as to where the value is. And actually, in Scotland at least, that is the maximum level that the bank is willing to lend. So if the home report value is £100,000 and you put in an offer of 110, then you have to put in the extra £10,000 yourself, as well as any of the deposits that you're putting down. And also, if the LTV is obviously 70-30 split, then you're putting down 30% and 30 grand of that too. So that's the way that residential property is. And when you're remortgaging, a simple a way of doing it is that the bank will go to a surveyor, again like GNS, and say they want a valuation carried out. The surveyor will go out to the property, look at it, and then compare it against other like-minded properties and similar properties in the near vicinity to give a value as to what it is at that specific point in time.
Okay, so next question. What needs to be done to increase the property value? Now, this is a very wide question. It's a very difficult one to answer because each property will be different. But we purchased a property, and Mark, can you remember the address? I can't even remember the address. It was in the Meadows. Chris Duff sourced it for us. Well, guys, I'm going to chuck a picture of it on screen now anyway, because obviously I'm not really chucking it on screen. The guy that's going to edit this video will be chucking it on screen. So there's a picture of it on the screen now. This property here, we just did some general renovations, and I could actually do a case study on this property as a BRR, but we added substantial value to this. But every property is different in what you can do to add value, especially residential. So we're talking about residential specifically. It may well be that you can add an extension. You can turn the attic space into basically apartments. Now, you know the property we've got in Assembly Street, the one that's currently a restaurant?
Yep.
That has attic space, Mark. And one of the suggestions that was put to us by GNS is if we ever get that property back,
Yeah.
so we split off the attic space and sell that to somebody, sell that to a residential developer. To be honest with you, I couldn't be bothered doing it. It'll just be hassle. But just sell that to a residential developer and we get a big chunk of our money back if our tenant ever gets into problems and the property comes back to us. So I think it's different in every single property. Do you have any advice, Mark, how to increase the value of a property?
It's different depending on the property that you're dealing with. I mean, commercial property would be pretty simple. One easy way to add value, just by improving the rental income that it generates, the actual term of the lease, or the covenant strength of the business. In terms of residential property, if you're able to improve the internals of it by refurbing and adding in potentially an extra bedroom, rather than say having a kind of standalone dining room or anything like that, that also adds value. But what I would caveat that with is that depending on the location, what you'll find is that in some places you'll have buyers that are there that are willing to pay a premium for a completed product, whereas in other locations you'll have buyers that are wanting to acquire with an ability to add value. So it depends what kind of market you're looking for, and that's where doing the research and the due diligence into the market will kind of give you the best knowledge to know as to which demand is going to pay the highest premium.
I know that we can check other properties, listen to the street, look at historic sales. Is there any other way to assess the potential value of a residential property? Well, Mark, I tell you what I do, okay? I always just ask an expert. If it's a commercial property, I'll ask you. If it's a residential property, I'll ask somebody else. So that townhouse that I bought in the Meadows, I phoned up somebody in your residential department. I mean, they didn't know me from Adam. I can't remember why I never asked Keith. They might have been on holiday or something, but I just phoned up your residential department, spoke to an agent. I gave them all of the details. And within 15 minutes, they told me. So that's how I do it, okay? And I always sense check that as well, because I know a number of other agents, so I always sense check it and run it by them. So that's the way I would do it. I just ask an expert. I
mean, that's definitely, you're going to get the best quality information from an expert. You can do your own kind of checking on the market, on the internet, obviously by looking at historic sales data, but also historic sales data. If it's not recent transactional evidence, then the market might have moved on since then, and so what you really want to be looking at is exactly where it is right now, and the only people that know that are going to be the experts.
Yeah, and the thing to bear in mind, an expert will say to you, Shaf, it may be worth £600,000, but properties of that age used to use asbestos in the Artex, for example. If you've got asbestos in the Artex, that is going to cost you £10,000 to remove, okay, because it's a massive house, and if it's in the whole house, that's what it's going to cost you. And a website is never going to tell you that. And for the avoidance of doubt, Mark, if somebody picks up the phone to you and asks you for a bit of advice, do you charge them?
No. It's free advice.
It's free advice, because like anybody else, a chartered surveyor is doing this to make money, and they're hoping that they will get an instruction. So Mark will give you the free advice, for example, or another chartered surveyor will give you the free advice. You say, yeah, I'm going to buy this. Then you'll need a valuation. So hopefully you'll go to Mark. Then you'll need a structural survey. Hopefully you'll go to Mark. You may want to build something in the garden, okay? And you'll go to somebody else in Mark's firm. So that's how it works. So getting that advice is free. Always leverage that free advice. That's what I would say to you.
And this is where it goes back to with the original point, is that establishing a quality relationship that does lead to kind of value being added on both sides. And that's why Shaf and GNS and myself obviously have such a good relationship, is that we know that it pays to offer that free advice and to give that information. If we were handing out free advice and it doesn't lead to fees kind of at some point in the future, then you might find that the answers are kind of become shorter. But we're all in this to make money, and we're there willing to help if we can do that.
Why? I've inherited a property, 3-bedroom terraced house that would be good for letting. I think it's worth about £355,000, but I haven't had it surveyed yet. Okay, first thing I would say is get it surveyed straight away, get a valuation on that. There is some light internal roof damage which needs to be done, but is it worth putting in a new bathroom, kitchen, and also doing the garden and driveways? I think that's a classic example of JY, just please refer to the previous answer. Get 3 agents in there, get them walking around, get their advice off them, get them to provide you the evidence to back up their advice. How do I estimate the maximum value of the property if everything was revamped? Again, ask the agents. How much should I spend on refurbishment?
It's how long's a piece of string? How much money do you have? What's the uplift in value going to be? Is it kind of, you know, like for like? If you spend 20 grand, are you only going to increase the value by 20 grand? In that circumstance, there's not really any point in doing that. If you're going to spend 20 grand and increase the value by 50 to 100,000 pounds, then that sounds great. But if you can spend 50 grand and increase it by 200,000 pounds, then you know, maybe you would decide to do that.
Thanks, Mark. I would have to borrow money for any home improvements that I make. Okay, so I think, Jawai, you really need to get some experts, chartered surveyors, a firm of chartered surveyors, good quality estate agents to give you some opinions here. And if you want a second opinion, once you've got their opinion, just post up what they say in the comments and we'll have a look at it for you. James Ledger, Shaf, I've saved up £10,000. What type of property investment would you recommend doing with this money? It would be my first property investment. Also, due to the current financial climate, when do you recommend buying? James, I have answered this question so many times, it's beyond belief. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get one of my team to go through all of my questions and break them down and put timestamps in. So if I've answered a question previously, I will just direct you to an exact link with that timestamp. So I don't think there's any point in me spending any more time answering this because I've done it loads of times, but I will definitely get somebody to put timestamps in so you can do that. I'm looking to buy to let properties that are put in a limited company. Would you put your own residence in the limited company too? I personally wouldn't, because I want to take advantage of the tax benefits. As I've said previously in this video, there's no problems in you renting a property from a limited company for a period of time. There's absolutely no issue with that at all. But main residence, you really just want to keep that in your own name. So when you do come and sell it, any profit you make is tax-free. I'm not planning on moving or having kids, but thinking of an interest-only mortgage. I would advise having some form of mechanism which pays down the capital as well, because it's your own home. Do you agree with that, Mark?
Well, absolutely. I think if you've got the ability to do so.
Moor End. I asked this in a previous video. There was supposed to be an answer in the video, but the question wasn't answered. When looking at buy-to-let mortgages, what type of agreement is the best, interest or repayment mortgages? I've answered this question probably about 3 times in my videos starting from episode 1, but I certainly touched on it last week. Can you outline the different pros and cons? I've already said I'm going to do a detailed video about this, so I'll outline the different pros and cons. And I'd rather do a structured video about this than really just answer a few questions here, and some of them apply and to various people and others don't. So I think I need to do a structured video. But if you want to get my views, answered them last week. As I said earlier on, I will get somebody in my team to basically put timestamps to all of the questions so you can refer to previous answers. Could you do a video on the best type of funding for investing in property that outlines the pros and cons of them, interest versus repayment? Yep, I've already said I'm going to do that, so that's not an issue either. Peter Blackhole, I want to invest in my first residential buy-to-let. However, I live in an area where house prices are high, so rental yields are low. You've mentioned it is generally better to stick to areas you know, but I'm seeking higher yields than I can realistically achieve in my area, and I think lower cost properties in other areas could be the way to go, especially as it's my first investment property. What would be your suggestions be for me and others who live in areas with high house prices who want to build high yielding residential property? Peter, John McGlynn answered this question in great detail. Now, what I'm going to try and do, you might have to give me a couple of weeks to do this. I'm going to get somebody in my team to go through all my previous videos and basically write out each single question with timestamps so you can just jump to that question. As soon as they've done that, I will put in John McGlynn's answer into the comments and you can go and view it. But hopefully, even by the time you're watching this, some of the previous videos will have these timestamps so you can just refer back, because I don't think there's any point in me answering the same question again and again and again. So I'll just put that in and that should deal with this for you. Pretty Annie, hi Shaf, having watched most of your videos, really good content and loving the rawness, would buy, refurb and refinance work during the pandemic? So essentially that strategy is you buy a rundown property, do the work, refinance it. Yes, it does work. I've got a real life example of it coming through in a first Ask Shaf live special. Okay, it'll appear on your screen right now when that's going to be. So it does work. There's absolutely no doubt about it. Saint Andy, hi Shaf, the content in your channel is incredible. The video on company structure would be brilliant. I'm definitely going to do that. Absolutely no problems. I've already started researching it and dragging bits of material, speaking to a few experts that I know, so I'm on the case there. Advice on the mechanism and method of initial capital investment into the newly founded limited company for the purpose of procuring initial property assets. Well, there's two ways that you can do that. You can introduce it as capital, or you can do it as a director's loan. So a director's loan, you as a shareholder of the director can loan the money to the company and the company owes you that money. Okay, so that's one way of doing it. Second way is basically introduce it as capital. Now, what I will do in my company, in my video that I'm going to do about limited companies, holding companies, etc., I will go through the benefits of each strategy. But me personally, I've always introduced money to my companies as directors' loans or loans from other companies. So there's an intercompany balance, but I'll go through the reasons in my limited company video, okay? Mark, I think that one's, there's no point in you answering that one. I have a question for you. If you have two houses, both worth £125,000 each, with mortgage debts of £60,000 in each, do I, A, hold on to them and pay down the mortgages? 9 years left. B, remortgage and buy two more houses. C, sell both and use the cash to do BRR to build up a portfolio. Do something else entirely. So the first one, do you hold on to them and pay down the mortgage? Yes, that's a very safe way of doing it. Okay, absolutely no problems. And then you're left over with two houses in 9 years' time that you would outright 100%. Downside is, because you've got no debt in there, you'll be paying a higher rate of tax. Your pros and cons of that one. B, remortgage and buy two more houses. Yes, you can remortgage, and at this possible time, if you can get a fix, you're never going to get a fix at a lower interest rate than what we have, unless of course we go into negative interest rates. And buy two more houses, potentially, yes, you could buy two more houses, no doubt about that. You may even get them cheaper because the market is going down. It may well be worth buying commercial property, but yeah, you can do that. Sell both and use the cash to do BRR to build up a portfolio. BRR, buy, rent, refurbish, refinance. I'm always of the view that you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, okay? So I think that potentially I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't put all my eggs in one basket. D, do something else entirely. Well, Sean, I think that what you've got to remember here is it's you that makes this decision. There is no correct formula. There is no correct method of generating wealth. It's what works for you, okay? What works for me is totally different from what works for you. I've just given you the pros and cons of both of them.
I think that it depends on Sean's risk profile, I guess. And if you're risk averse, then all you'll do is you'll just invest in the two assets that you have and just basically effectively pay off that mortgage and have those two assets paid off in 9 years' time. If you are wanting to, just stick with what you know, then acquiring the two extra residential properties, that will certainly provide a kind of very, very good income stream that he already knows. But for me, I would be looking at trying to diversify his investments slightly and looking at commercial property just to try and kind of vary the investment a little bit. Because if he was able to secure a longer term income from commercial property, say a 10-year lease, by acquiring commercial assets, and it might only end up being one commercial asset rather than two residential properties, that then gives him a long-term income stream that can, if worst case scenario happens on the residential assets and he has a little bit of downtime in between tenants, then the commercial asset will continue to provide an income. So I think it's just about, it depends on the risk profile of every person.
I think that's the questions we're going to do today, Mark, right? But I'd like to just ask you some questions which I think my viewers would find interesting. What do you prefer, commercial or residential property?
My mum has residential properties, but I prefer commercial simply because I think that it provides a longer term, more secure income stream it doesn't need to be as hands-on. Now, you might have a little bit more downtime in between tenants, but the great thing about commercial property is that you have a lot more rights as a landlord than you do as a residential landlord. So if you are to acquire an asset that is vacant, and then you are to put in a long-term tenant in there. So when I say long-term, it used to be the norm was 15 years plus, up to 25 years back in the 90s that tenants would take, and that would just give you a long-term income stream that was upward only at rent reviews. So you knew that you were never going to get less than the rent that started from day one, and that's really positive. Nowadays, you're seeing a lot more flexibility in terms of leases, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing either, because there's an opportunity for more growth and more turnover in terms of the tenants, and you can improve the kind of quality of the asset. But if you're able to get, let's say, a good quality covenant in for a 10-year period at a fair rent that you know is going to cover your outlays in terms of your repayments for the capital and interest on a mortgage, then you're sitting on a really, really secure asset. And then coupled with that, if you've employed the right agent to negotiate the deal, then what you'll be getting is an FRI lease. It's full repairing and insuring. And what that does is that when you hand over that asset to the tenant and they take it on day one of their lease, they are then effectively the owners of that until lease expiry. So any of the issues, whether or not it's the roof caves in and needs to be replaced, that's a tenant requirement to invest and repair and maintain that roof. If the white goods break in the property, that's a tenant's requirement to replace and maintain that. It's just a lot more hands off, and that's the reason why I think that commercial property is a much better investment than residential. However, for people like my mum, it keeps them busy in their retirement. So yeah, there's pros and cons to both.
I think commercial property is genuine passive income, because if you do it properly, rent's paid quarterly. So you raise 4 invoices a year and the tenant is responsible for absolutely everything as long as it's a fair FRI lease. A lot of people have said to me, oh, but how do people agree to FRI leases? Well, I think out of our portfolio, we've got in excess of 100 commercial properties. We have got 1 IRI lease. Okay, and when that lease comes to an end, I'll not be reletting that property unless it is an FRI lease. I'd rather it's sat empty. So that's the beauty of that. Would you agree with me in terms of wealth generation? It's easier to generate wealth from commercial property than it is residential.
Yeah, I definitely think it is, because residential property, you need an entire market to improve, to increase in the asset value. Whereas with commercial property, like we've touched on, throughout this video, just securing a better tenant covenant or length of lease, or indeed the rent on that property will increase, the asset's wealth and therefore your wealth.
Yeah, and then that's not even taking into account things like change of use, etc.
Yeah.
Yeah. Brilliant. So I think, Mark, that's us at the end of this Q&A session. Have you got any words of wisdom for my viewers?
Just keep on watching the videos and you'll learn from the best.
Really? Am I getting you back on? Is that why we're going to learn from the best?
Yeah. I was talking about me, of course, yeah.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Mark, thank you very much for this.
So guys, that's the end of another episode of Ask Shaf Live. Now, can I please ask you a big favour? If you've got any questions, can you please leave them in the comments below? Because if I don't have questions, I don't have the opportunity to do a video next week or the week after. So I need lots of questions to do a video. Just leave them in the comments below. Also, if you haven't subscribed, can I please ask you to subscribe? And finally, can you hit the like button, leave me a comment, because the more comments and the more likes I get, the more this will show up in the YouTube algorithm and appear in YouTube, which results in more viewers for me. And I'm sure you'll agree that my videos are worth watching and they should get lots of views. Thank you, appreciate it. Stay safe, see you next week.